I'm sitting here looking at an Android emulator, Android x86, which is actually a pretty cool little emulator, and it's actually for x86 platforms, computers that you might normally install Windows on, for example, or Linux. And I've got this installed into a virtual machine, although you can install it on a typical x86 platform. And to say it's an emulator may not be the right term. It actually seems to be fairly functional, whereas an emulator would only run in a sandbox and perform limited functions. So this may be useful for you from a security perspective to take a peek into Android and play with it a little bit, download some apps, and check out security for yourself. It probably would be better to work with this kind of emulator than it would be to actually play with and destroy or brick an Android device, unless you just happen to have one sitting around that you don't care about. So let's take a look at this and see how it looks. And from a security perspective, again, this may be useful to learn on, but I'm not sure you would get a lot more out of it other than possibly learning how different Android applications may work, such as rooting software and some of the other stuff we discussed earlier. It has the typical Android apps on it. I just set this particular one up, and it took me through the setup just like you would a new tablet. And it's even got some dev tools on here, and I think that's very useful because it gives you the options of testing accounts. It gives you a bad behavior option here to crash threads and processes, report conditions, to slow up the tablet and so forth. So kind of interesting stuff there. And it also comes with a cache abuser where you can quickly or slowly abuse the internal or external caches. So using this emulator might give you an idea of how an actual Android device reacts when it's put under a load or under some stressful conditions. So there's some interesting things there in the dev tools. It actually will go to the Play Store, and if you want to, you can do a search on something like rooting the device. And you'll find that Google actually does not support rooting software that comes down from the Google Play Store. However, there are some things that kind of talk to you about rooting and kind of tell you how to do it. Some tutorials you can get. And I think if you search on root, there's actually a checker here that will determine if you have root access on the device or not. So that could be fairly useful. A slow connection here, so give it just a second. And if we were to come down here to the apps, one I saw earlier is Root Checker, and it basically lets you determine if you actually have root on the box or not. So it's kind of interesting from that perspective, and we can install it and see if this box has root on it. And it installs just like a normal physical tablet would install it. And we can go ahead and open it up here. A little bit of a disclaimer here. We say OK, and it's Root Checker Basic. And it notifies you up here on the top that due to security concerns, Google bans application from providing root access. So you're not going to be able to root using any software from Google Play. And it also tells you, will not root this device, will verify proper root installation. So if you do root it, this will determine whether or not you've done it correctly, apparently. So verify root access. Sorry, this device does not have proper root access. So kind of interesting app there, and an interesting emulator as well. So if we go back into Google Play, we could probably see other types of apps and so forth that might help us determine security. And as a matter of fact, we could search for jailbreaking and see what we get. So there's some interesting games here, and actually some apps that talk to you about jailbreaking iOS, obviously. So nothing of the kind that actually would allow you to jailbreak the Android itself, more than likely. Getting a little bit of a slower connection here. One note that you probably should know, if you have the Android software development kit, there's probably a much better emulator in that than this, because it allows you to interact with it from your desktop and provide different inputs and so forth. It's primarily for developers, Android developers. And, there's a possibility that you could use security tools on it and better get an idea of the security features for your Android device. Again, no real jailbreaking applications here. You could look for security apps if you wanted to. We can see what we get from there. And there's some different security apps for Android, obviously. Mobile security and antivirus, AVG, a version for Android, Lookout security and antivirus, So this could also give you the opportunity to play around with some of these security apps to see how they work on an Android device. So again, from a security perspective, probably more of a training tool than anything else, more than a hacking tool, but it may help you discover some vulnerabilities or some methods to hack an Android device that you didn't know before. So just something cute to look at.